Hi, Scott Livingston here from ReconditioningHQ.com. We've been talking a little bit in several videos about the idea of the outside cut in sport and some of the limiting factors for that. We could have a hardware, software restriction in the foot. We could have something going on in the hip. Now, do we have good control of our pelvis and trunk and the ability to associate the two things? That's going to be really important in this whole equation as well, because as we go to close that pelvis, we want that whole thing to link over top so we can produce force off of it. So we could have a software control issue of that zone, or we could have hardware restriction. We're going to talk more about the software in this case, just about the idea of being able to create that cylinder on top of that pelvis. So what we want to do is take it down to the ground and make sure that, one, we have the availability of that range of motion of that femur on pelvis, and we can activate it. We can also manually assess it. But if we don't have it, we want to work on our breath, coordination of our breath and control. We want to create a good cylinder position. And we talk about in our reconditioning course something called the intra-abdominal pressure that we work on creating in that trunk to create a good solid cylinder, almost like a can, that we don't have any bends in the continuity of the can, so it can manage pressure and stress. So we work on that, and we work on creating that cylinder and breathing, and then coordinating the motion of that femur on that pelvis. Once we can create that motion of the femur on the pelvis, can we come into a quarter bridge and still manipulate that? So we've got good control of our trunk, but we can manipulate the femur on the pelvis. Now we can come to the side, and if I reverse dynamic it, can I go up into a pelvic shift and actually turn my pelvis on that fixed femur and keep that cylinder linked? So working to close the femur, pelvis on the femur, open the pelvis on the femur. Once I can do those kinds of things, I can also go into a quadruped position, and I can be in that quadruped position and do what we like to call fire hydrants. So create good position of the trunk, and then can I actually manipulate that femur on pelvis? Can I do it as a open can like this, or a free moving femur? Okay, so we can do all that on the ground. Then we can come up onto our standing position, get our stance position, and can we get into that good ready stance position and manipulate again that femur on pelvis without losing the trunk? And then can we create that change of position of the pelvis on femur, that form closure, form opening, with that trunk linked in? So we've talked in a few videos about the different links in the chain of being able to acquire that ground contact position. The foot, the hip, the trunk. The knee is really a victim of the control of those joints. So if you have good foot position, good hip mobility, and hip acquisition, then our knee's going to follow along and play in that dynamic really well. If we don't have a good foot, our knee's going to get affected. If we don't have a good hip, our knee's going to get affected. So the knee ends up being the bad boy in between two zones that need to acquire and move really effectively. So hope that helps you guys with some of the work that you want to do in those joints. Again, remember that you want to be able to assess effectively, and that's what we get into in some of our courses, and then understand how to layer it all together to rebuild it. Thanks.